Indignation has no limits. Arresting Julian Assange is murdering the truth, murdering human rights, and eliminating freedom of speech, let alone freedom of the media. The latter has been a farce since a while, but what happened on the 11th of April and in preparation of the 11th of April, the storming by UK police of the Ecuadorian embassy in London to drag Julian Assange from his room, rather a cell within the embassy, was the pinnacle of abuse and of atrocity on humanity. Julian Assange has been basically for almost 7 years under house arrest in the Ecuadorian embassy, especially during the last 2 years after Lenin Moreno, the new right-wing Washington shoo-in, became Ecuador's new president, another Latin American neoliberal leader. Moreno's predecessor, Rafael Correa, granted Julian Assange not only asylum, but also Ecuadorian citizenship. Correa admired Assange's courage to inform the world of the war crimes and atrocities committed by the United States. Correa's successor, Moreno, at the instruction of Washington, deprived Julian Assange of any rights as a human being under asylum in a foreign country which the Ecuadorian embassy represents. He was no longer allowed to receive visits, nor access to internet, and was confined to a small room. Julian lived under de facto house arrest. As a last straw, Moreno took Assange's passport away. Similar instructions from Washington were ignored by President Correa. President Correa's unsubmissiveness is among the reasons why Washington didn't allow Correa to run for another term, even though a vast majority of the people supported him. Commissioned by Washington to run for a high public office, like the presidency, is a must, enforced by serious threats. But equally shameful, abjectly shameful, and it is not said enough, is Australian silence. Julian Assange is an Australian citizen. Yet the Australian government, also a total vassal of the faltering and morally corrupt empire, let a citizen of theirs being exposed to horrendous injustice, pain, being most likely extradited to the US, where he can expect no justice, but may possibly be tortured and killed. Several American lawmakers have already called out for Assange's execution, even extrajudiciary execution, if everything else fails. That is totally in the cards. Just think of Obama's and Trump's vamped-up extrajudiciary drone killings. Nobody says beep, it's the new normal. The West looks on and keeps enjoying its comfort zone of no hear, no see, no talk. What a life! Citizens of Australia, where are you? You have more ethics and morals than your government, than bending to this cowardice of silence and consenting a crime. Stand up. Cry out to free Assange. Julian's freedom is your freedom. That's what the West masters best. Entertaining cowards, who know about the truth, who know that Julian Assange's arrest is wrong, is a fraud, is the ultimate farce and assault on truth, on freedom of speech. It is the final abuse of human rights. Stand up, people. There is no doubt that Lenin Moreno, the new Washington implant in Ecuador, is not only a coward but a criminal in terms of human rights abuse. He knows that Julian Assange faces extradition to the US, torture and possibly the death penalty. He knows that he made a deal with Washington to get Assange eventually back to the US to stand trial and very possibly being tortured. Chelsea Manning, an intelligence analyst in Iraq at the time, is said having supplied WikiLeaks the bulk of information. The truth about a criminal US regime, about its war crimes, is currently also in jail, certainly not by coincidence. The two will serve the world as examples. You better behave, and do not interfere with our attempts, whatever criminal form it may take, to take over the world, to reach in the shortest time now, world hegemony. Crimes on humanity, like those committed in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Yemen, Venezuela, Cuba, Sudan, Pakistan, and the list goes on, are part of the plan to subdue humanity and eventually planet Earth. To the will and whims of empire, hell is a falling empire that thrives for the benefit and greed of a few weapons and financial oligarchs, hence the speed with which empire now operates. When you eventually succumb to human justice, to nature's justice, a justice way above that fake, servile, man-made justice, then you know it, and then destroy whatever you can before, so that nobody can survive. It's akin to a wild animal before dying, lashing out around itself to bring down whatever it can before biting the dust. Our Western world is becoming ever so more honest, showing its true face, namely abject inhumanity. The criminality runs down the Western face like tears of joy, albeit tears of blood. Who even dares still using the terms of freedom, democracy, freedom of speech? Believe me, there are still people in this world of comfort, of no care for the next, that trust life in the West as heaven of justice, of democracy. Never mind that justice is trampled with boots and guns and bombs. If that's not enough, fly in NATO, the all-destructive force run by the Pentagon and subscribed to by 27 European countries out of 29, the others being the United States and Canada. Doesn't that say a lot? Well, it's in our hands to change it. As Maria Zakharova, Russian Foreign Ministry's spokesperson, so adroitly puts it, the hand of democracy, squeezing the throat of freedom. WikiLeaks editor, Christian Ronson, warns, no journalist will be safe from extradition to the US for doing his job, adding that Julian Assange is facing political persecution for doing his job as a journalist. She vowed to fight his extradition to the US. Bolivian President Evo Morales says, "We strongly condemn the detention of Julian Assange and the violation of freedom of speech. Our solidarity is with this brother who is persecuted by the US government for bringing to light its human rights violations, murders of civilians and diplomatic espionage." Then you have, don't laugh, it's serious, US Vice President Pence and Foreign Secretary Pompeo, who was saying that Assange and Manning colluded with Russia. Assange is a Putin agent, that's why we ask for extradition to the US. Julian Assange is a hero for the rest of those of us who are not willing to submit and to bend down in front of the powers that cannot stand opposition, and cannot tolerate humanity's thrive for individual and societal freedom, cannot stand the sovereignty of nations unless their sovereignty is totally compromised and submissive to the empire's fist, boots and bombs. That's the case of the European Union. The EU, and all associated nations, is run by the Pentagon via NATO. The EU could have said, stop to the arrest of Assange on their EU territory. The people of the EU should just take this as another example how Brussels is a mere and miserable vassal of Washington's, unable to defend the sovereignty, the right of the citizens, and the right of those that defend freedom of speech, a nominal, albeit farcical, priority of the EU. Nobody interfered with this abject and bloodthirsty arrest in the morning of the 11th of April. Brussels was silent. No surprise there, but again, a huge deception of the rulers, sick, of Europe. Is it a coincidence that the 11th of April was also the day of another Washington-initiated murderous act? On the 11th of April 2002, 17 years ago, Washington conspired and orchestrated directly, live via video, the coup attempt in Caracas against Venezuela's democratically and overwhelmingly elected President Hugo Chavez. The coup failed, as Chavez then, and as President Maduro today, had and have the massive support of the people and the military. On the 13th of April, at the forceful request of the people, the golpistas had to assume their failure and President Chavez returned from his two-day exile on Lorca Island, a military base, where he was flown by helicopter. British police, fully subject to the masters of terror, what Europe under the Washington Pentagon regime has become, followed their order to arrest Julian even with some joy, when one watches the faces and gesticulations of the vicious arrest of those brutes that dragged Assange out of the embassy into a waiting police van, to be driven off to a court hearing. But what a court hearing! Resembling a kangaroo court of any third-rate dictator, the assigned district judge, Michael Snow, proceeded without a jury for about 15 minutes to declare Assange guilty of crimes dictated by Washington. Assange had no chance to protest other than twice he said not guilty, and asked why the accusation was changed in the middle of the proceedings. Assange's crime is having divulged U.S. war crimes like the indiscriminate shooting of civilians, a video that traveled 1 million times around the world for the people to see what ice-cold, heartless murderers the U.S. is composed of, all tolerated and actually encouraged by the Pentagon, the U.S. presidency and, naturally, the dark forces that hold the strings that move the puppets. These are crimes that should have been, and still should be, judged by the International Criminal Court, ICC, in The Hague. But, of course, the ICC won't touch them. They have recently made a lukewarm attempt to accuse some Afghan and U.S. soldiers of war crimes, but stopped when the Trump-Pompeo Bolton team called out threats to the court if they dare touch an American citizen. That's the way justice works in our Western world. Disrespect for human rights, for human lives, for the rights and independence of other people on the globe from Asia to Africa to Latin America has been, and still is, a historic truth. Europe turned the colonies into slavery. Why would they behave differently now? Sadly, the human condition of Europeans, of the West, after all, North Americans are nothing but transplanted Europeans, has not changed. Does it take a total demise for people to come to the senses? In recent years, this impunity has turned into a bold, flagrant, openly demonstrated crime for all eyes to see, eyes that still have some iota of conscience left. Haven't you noticed, people of the West, of the comfortable West? It's high time to react. If you don't, you'll be next, that is as sure as day follows night. The hegemon will not stop to protect you in your comfort zone. Comes the time you are no longer needed, once all your resources, including your drinking water, are under full control of a few corporate oligarchs. People like Julian Assange were and still offering their life to stop this criminal murderous advancement of the greedy few that aim to control this world. Those aiming at full-spectrum dominance, so well spelled out in the PNAC, plan for a new American century. Defending Julian Assange, not letting him be extradited to the paradise of assassins, the United States of America, is an act of self-defense for the world that still values its freedom, its right to sovereign ruling and liberty of expression. If you let extradition of Julian to the US happen, people of Europe, you'll kill the media as you know it, and even if you know only mainstream media, they will be gone too, as there comes the moment when they, the Anglosian media corporations, do no longer represent the interests of your comfort zone. Then it is too late. You, British police, you, people of the UK, people of Europe, people who are supposed to lead the EU, stand up for Julian Assange. Stand up for justice. Stand up for freedom of speech. Stand up for your own interests, the interests of your countries, the people, the interests and right to a free and sovereign life. Stand up. Leave your cloths of naked vassalism behind. First published in New Eastern Outlook, Neo. Peter Koenig is an economist and geopolitical analyst. He is also a former World Bank staff and worked extensively around the world in the fields of environment and water resources. He lectures at universities in the US, Europe and South America. He writes regularly for Global Research, RT, Sputnik, Press TV, The Fourth Media, China, Telesur, The Vineyard of the Seiko blog, and other internet sites. He is the author of Implosion, an economic thriller about war, environmental destruction and corporate greed, fiction based on facts and on 30 years of World Bank experience around the globe. He is also a co-author of The World Order and Revolution, Essays from the Resistance. Read other articles by Peter. This article was posted on Tuesday, April 16, 2019 at 9:07 p.m. and is filed under Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange, UK Hypocrisy, UK Lies, UK Media, United Kingdom, United States, US War Crimes, WikiLeaks. Let's block ads. Why?